Thank you, Patrick. It is great to be here at ARPA-E. Had the opportunity to attend last year's ARPA-E Summit, but it's even better to be outside of Washington, D.C. I was going to say in Denver, but I think we're like in somewhere in Colorado.
You can see Denver.
So I lead the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about renewable energy, thinking about the state of renewable energy, and how we do a good job integrating renewables into the grid. And obviously one of the benefits of increasing renewable energy is reducing carbon dioxide emissions.
Right.
And just wanted to ask you about Xcel's strategy to reduce carbon dioxide emissions.
Well, thank you, and it's great to be here. And one of the things I would just say is everything I'm talking about is being driven by innovation and breakthroughs in technology, and it's allowed us to achieve a 40% carbon emissions reduction off a 2005 base year. And technology is going to allow us to achieve, I think, even more remarkable goals in the future. And to your point, Danielle, we have a vision that by 2050 we will be carbon free. And then we have an interim goal to reduce carbon emissions by 80% by 2030. Now, I will just tell you that we're going to need more technology to achieve that 2050 goal. But we have the technology today to achieve that interim 80% reduction by 2030. And of course, you have to do it with affordability and reliability in mind. And the technological breakthroughs that we've seen in just the last 10 years, where renewables are, 20% of what they were, 10 years ago, it's just remarkable, and it's allowing us to do that. So we're going to move away from coal. By 2030, we retire many of our coal plants. We are going to have more renewable on our system than I think any other, certainly any utility in the United States, if not the world, and that'll be at 50 to 60%. We're already a renewable leader today, and by next year, renewable energy will be our largest source of energy. So we're going to put more solar, more wind, more battery storage on the grid. We are going to preserve our carbon-free nuclear fleet, asking our regulators to give us an extension on their license life. Nuclear, we all know, is carbon-free, and it represents about 55% of the carbon-free energy in the nation, so we need it. It's also dispatchable, which we can talk about. And then we're going to use natural gas to back up the system so we have the reliability we need for the various scenarios that we have to plan for. All total, it's an 80% carbon reduction. And of course, our guidepost is always, we cannot sacrifice affordability and reliability. And we think with the technological breakthroughs we've seen, we can do just that.
Great. So, and where are you today? Like, what's your generation mix today?
Well, as I mentioned, we're moving away from coal. That had been the workhorse of especially in the Midwest. By next year, renewables will be about, I think, a third of our energy mix. Nuclear will be about 12%. It's concentrated in the upper Midwest. Coal will still be, I believe, in that 25% range, but we're moving away from it, and then gas fills in the void, and we also have some hydro. So that's where we are today, and again, 2030 will be a completely different scenario.
So with renewables, I mean, one of the things about particularly wind and solar is that they are, I wouldn't say location dependent, but they have different value depending on locations. With Xcel, with an interesting footprint here in Colorado, also in Minnesota, how do you work with the geography of your footprint?
So we're in 8 states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Dakotas, here in Colorado, Texas and New Mexico, a little bit of Michigan as well. And to your point, we have some of the best renewable resources right in our backyard, particularly wind from Minnesota all the way down to Texas, the best in the country. So that allows us to bring that wind energy in at a price point that is actually, with these breakthroughs in technology, cheaper than using natural gas. So we look at it as a deeply in the money hedge for our customers, so we get greener and they save money. That is geographically unique to us. But I will also tell you, we're in Minnesota, and that's not the solar capital of the United States. And yet solar is economically, large-scale solar I'm talking about, is economically working for our customers. So again, we're at an innovation and technology summit, and this is what we've seen in just the last 10 years.
So you mentioned 2030 and how we need to have new technologies after that to continue to drive up the use of carbon dioxide-free energy after 2030. Like, what is, what do you see after 2030? What are the technologies that we need to really hit that goal?
Well, it's a really good question because, I mentioned that we're going to have 50 to 60% of our energy mix by 2030 coming from renewables. The engineers and the scientists who really study this tell us that when you get to that point, it's really a saturation point at that. And then you really hit the knee of the curve in terms of cost, operating efficiencies, a lot of different things. And what I'm talking about here is the big grid. So as we all know, we're all connected to that big grid. And so a customer or an individual or a business or even a community can be 100% renewable or 100% clean, but it's all syncing to that big grid. And so we do reach maximum penetration levels. And that, even with storage, that's about the number. So we need dispatchable carbon-free resources, which is why I think it's so important that we preserve our existing nuclear fleet and we work on developing that next generation of nuclear technology. I'm pretty much technology agnostic on how we'll get there. It should be driven by economics. But I am impressed with the next generation of nuclear. Things that I'd never thought possible, hydrogen and producing hydrogen from renewables and making that a renewable gas. That has some promise. Hydro, geothermal, more energy efficiency. There's a whole host of things that I'm sure we're talking about today, and I just think it's important we put the time in today so we can see those technological breakthroughs that'll allow us to achieve that goal. Because once we do, think about using carbon-free energy to electrify other sectors. And that's where there's a real opportunity. Again, it can be driven by economics.
Sure. So, one of the key drivers of very high penetrations of renewables is better storage.
Yeah.
Just wondering how Xcel thinks about energy storage, what is possible today versus what you're hoping to see in the future.
Well, what I think we ultimately need is more long duration storage. The storage that we're seeing today is and what we're hearing about is lithium ion, and it's basically designed for 4 hours. The first tranche of that storage on our systems is very valuable, and I can treat it just like I would a peaking natural gas plant. The second, third, fourth, fifth tranche, you start to see diminishing returns, and that's because we have to plan for more than 4 hours. We have weather events that last weeks, and we have seasonality, of course, of our load and seasonality of wind and solar as well. So I'm encouraged by the progress we've seen in battery technology, and we certainly are going to deploy it, but we're going to need that long duration storage, I think, to really have some breakthroughs.
Great. Which takes care of that question. So one of the challenges that we think about in my office, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, is trying to understand the different values that different sources of generation provide to the grid. Once upon a time, there was a lot of spinning generators. There was a lot of inertia. All that, essentially, a lot of that came for free. And so, as we have this changing grid, I was also wondering, how does Xcel think about, how do you make sure that you are retaining reliability? Because the last thing you want as a major utility is for customers to be in the dark.
That's right. If there's a reliability issue, the clean energy transition is going to come to, I think, a screeching halt. If we can't keep our product affordable, it's going to slow down considerably too. And you mentioned those things that we used to take for granted. Those sorts of grid health qualities we have to be very mindful of. So I spend a lot of time with my system engineers, and we make sure that they are modeling the system based upon these scenarios, and to the point where how much additional transmission will we need, where do we need to put some of that spinning mass to maximize the value of it. These are all things that we're taking for granted. They're not now. That said, I would also have told you 10, 15 years ago, I would never have guessed that from a reliability standpoint, we could integrate this much renewables. So we're seeing how to operate the grid differently too. But I do think you get to a saturation point where it's like, okay, now we need this dispatchable spinning mass that we can bring to the big grid that we're all connected to, and provide what our customers expect 24/7 from us.
Mm-hmm. So we're here at the ARPA-E Summit. I lead the Office of Energy Efficiency. Obviously, one of the things that matters is as we are working on these fundamental technologies, these we're thinking about how we get these technologies into the real world. And one of the questions is making sure that we are working on things that have real application. So one question for you is, what do you see as government's role in innovation? What should we be doing? What should we maybe be doing better than we are currently doing to continue to drive forward this, the focus on affordability, the focus on improving the grid in terms of environmental performance as well?
It's a great question. I will tell you, utilities like myself, we're not R&D companies. I mean, we can deploy the technology, but we really need to deploy it at the speed of value. So the great work that this organization is doing, the national labs are doing, I think we need to double down on that. And I would encourage us to focus on those technologies that have the promise to get that last 20% of carbon, off the grid. We've done a great job with breakthroughs in solar and breakthroughs in wind, and a lot of that was research driven and with market-based solutions. I think we need to apply that, and the work coming out of labs is really important. The other thing, of course, that the federal government can do is encourage and incent some of these more nascent technologies, and of course that was a big part of the solar and wind story. Those incentives are going away, and quite frankly, I think they can. The technology is competing on its own. But we need to consider perhaps encouraging through incentives those technologies that need a little nudge and help so they can get scale, and then we can deploy them. That's at the federal level. Of course, at the state level, which most utilities in the United States are regulated by, we need to have regulators align with programs that encourage affordability and reliability. We can't afford to go down, policy rabbit holes that end up making our customers' product more expensive than it needs to be. And there's plenty of examples in the United States and in the world where, policymakers have done just that.
Sure thing. And I pause there because we had just talked backstage about a certain European country that has electricity rates 3 times what they are in the United States. I think that our environmental performance is better than theirs, and we have electricity rates that are 3 times, or 1/3 of their electricity rates, which I think speaks to the good work going on in the United States at the state level, at the federal level, from a regulatory perspective, from a utility perspective, and from an R&D perspective in the federal government. That's the affordability. I just think is key. That the real one of the biggest drivers of all of the renewables that we're seeing on the grid is just that they are so low cost these days that you can't keep them off the grid.
That's right. I mean, it's an excellent point. We have a program called Steel for Fuel, where the steel, in this case, is these wind farms that you and I talked about. And when you price it out, it's cheaper than the natural gas. That's already, through technology breakthroughs, really cheap and helping the clean energy transition in its own right, but it's cheaper than that. And the proof in that is really, we were able to get approval in Texas, where that's what they were interested in, the economics, not necessarily the environmental benefits. And economics always prevails, I believe, in the long run. At least I hope it does. And the great news here is we can do that with technology combined with the right public policy.
Well, thank you very much. And the environmental performance overall in the United States is a great success story. Later this month, EPA will be releasing their air quality trends report that will again have, I just saw a sneak peek, and it has some very good numbers in there for continuing to clean up criteria pollutants, continuing to clean up the air, even as we're growing the economy. It's a great success story. So thank you very much for everything that you are doing to continue to drive towards an affordable energy future with reliable energy and a very incredibly clean future as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and let's keep innovating.